Oh, all right. I'm having a wonderful chat with pianist Roberta Rust in Florida. Hey, by the way, what's going on outside? Are you okay? It's that day.
We are very relieved because we do believe that Hurricane Dorian will bypass us. We were, even as of yesterday, worried about a direct hit
Yeah.
and filled up the cars with gas, have the batteries in the water, but it looks like today it's going to turn north. And so I think we will be spared a direct hit.
Just for historical purposes, everybody, I know you're all keeping these videos as archival pieces for all time. It is the 31st of August, 2019. Once again, a hurricane is heading toward and you're on the East Coast, aren't you? The East Coast of
Yes,
Florida, yeah?
yes, up
Right
at
now?
Boynton Beach in Palm Beach County. It's
Yeah,
right,
so right,
I'm
well,
10-15 from
I
the ocean.
I don't see anything rattling or hear any howling wind, so I think you're okay. Anyway, forgive me for asking that question. It was right on my head. Talking again with pianist Roberta Rust. We're talking about your 2019 Navona CD. It's called Direct Contact. Funny, I'll have to ask you about that. Wonderful music for piano, primarily American, all American composers, I think. Yeah, actually, well,
No,
and
there's
Cuban.
a Cuban and a
Leo,
Brazilian,
right,
and then
yes.
the others are American. And one of the Americans has really been in Singapore for over 30
I
years.
saw that. I was fascinated. Anyway, forgive me. I got all messed up there. But we're talking George Rochberg, American
Yes.
composer. Michael Anderson, very interesting composer. I'm not familiar with Michael Anderson's pieces. There are two pieces of his: a sonata and something called 13+4. Leo Brouwer, the Cuban composer.
Yeah.
And I told you off camera, I've seen that name for years, and I just took it for granted as being, I don't know, European or English or something. I had no idea he
Mhm.
was Cuban. Incredible. Ellen Zwilich, we decided we will not try and pronounce her middle name. Ellen Zwilich, American composer. Lament, beautiful, beautiful piece of piano. Phillip Evans, Almeida Prado, he's the Brazilian composer on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cartas Celestes, very interesting. We'll talk about these, I hope, a lot of these. Thomas L.
Yes.
McKinley and John Sharpley. So here we've got on one CD this really incredible overview, which is the intention of everybody's CD when they put it together. But I think you covered a very vast swarm of music. Most all of this was of this wonderful piano music was written for you. Tell me.
Well, no,
Some, but not all, huh?
well, some of it was, but this is music. All of the composers that I've had some type of direct contact. That's the name of the CD. Some of these composers I know quite well. Some of them I met briefly, but played the work for them that's on the CD. So I had some, connection with them directly, and
Yeah.
that was the inspiration for that title.
And I'm going to want to ask you especially about your encounter with Leo Brouwer. Fascinating. In Cuba in 2016. Let's figure out who Roberta Rust is. Dr. Rust serves as artist, faculty, piano professor, and head of the piano department at the Lynn University Conservatory of Music in Boca Raton, Florida. How'd I do?
Very good.
Okay, that's about 17,000 syllables.
Yeah, yeah,
Your
yeah.
undergrad work at Peabody, graduated cum laude from University of Texas at Austin, and earned performance certificates at the Mozarteum in Salzburg. Student of wonderful pianists. Arthur Balsam came to mind. John Perry. She received, you received your master's degree from Manhattan School of Music and your doctorate from the University of Miami, and then apparently stayed put.
Yes, and then I got a position here in Boca Raton at a school originally called the Herod Conservatory, which still exists as a dance school.
Hmm.
But in 1999, the Herod organization had to let go of its music conservatory. It couldn't fund both divisions of the school, and Lynn University, fortunately, acquired it. And actually, this year we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the acquisition of this conservatory by Lynn University, and so I was able to remain in Boca Raton and continue with this really short teaching job.
And that's very nice, I think, in general, to receive your PhD and then stay more or less in the same community. That's something. Also, the story of a rescue, a school of music that was about to cease to exist being rescued.
Yes, and Lynn University did a wonderful thing for the arts in South Florida by doing that.
Most everybody that are on my list are professional musicians and college professors, lots of college professors and so on, dancers, everybody in the performing arts, lots and lots of people, but primarily professional musicians, producing CDs, a lot.
Hmm.
producing CDs. Everybody, myself included, I've never produced a CD, but I know that it's costs money. You got to raise money,
Hmm.
and I found it really fascinating. This is our chance to get a little sort of background on you. Let's just start with this wonderful story of how you went about receiving funding and why for this
Hmm.
CD. In other words, the Native American connection.
Well, there's something called the Indian Buyback Program, and I'm a Native American descendant, a Sioux descendant. My mother was born on an Indian reservation near Mobridge, South Dakota. And every summer, my parents and the whole family, we would go back to South Dakota to visit our grandparents on the reservation. And we, as descendants, had certain land or mineral rights to certain Indian lands that we inherited. And a few years ago, under the Obama administration, there was something called the Indian Buyback Program, and it was a program to buy back some of the land or the Indian or the mineral rights to this Indian land from the Indian descendants. And so uh, I was approached by that program, and I decided to sell some of the mineral rights that I had to some of these lands. And so I thought, well, I'll save those funds for a rainy day or for a very special project. And I thought this is exactly what I would like to use those funds for, as the CD is in part dedicated to my mother, my late mother, who was American Indian.
Fabulous, and also as we've discussed earlier, finally getting us a little something back, you
Yeah,
know,
well,
after these years of blood and tears. Yeah,
yeah,
how's that?
yeah.
Uh, but and I've got to go here because you had the nerve in your program booklet to mention this, so you're stuck, and I want to ask you about it because it's really cute. I think, uh,
Okay.
you talk about your childhood passions, and music
Uh-huh.
wasn't at the top of the list.
Uh-huh.
Tell us, and then tell us
Well,
who talked you into music or how
I,
music came
I
about.
I had three ambitions. My first ambition was to be a cowboy, and some of it was these trips back to the reservation to my grandfather and grandmother had a cattle ranch. And so we would go back in the summers there, and I would look up to my uncles, and they would be, they'd have cowboy hats and boots and spurs and ride horses and all that stuff. And so I was, 4, 5, 6 years old. So I very much looked up to them, and I wanted to be a cowboy. And then that did not pan out. And then the second ambition was to be a Major League Baseball player because I loved Major League Baseball. I was a Houston Astros fan. I remember going to the Astrodome in the first season of ball games there. I remember when the grass turned yellow, and then because was covered and they didn't think that would happen, and that's when AstroTurf was invented.
Oh,
And
that was
so
good. I had no idea.
but I loved baseball, and my dad used to take us out. So that was my second ambition. That didn't pan out. Then my third ambition was to be a professional musician. So I always loved music. I started studying the piano at age 5. I took up the cello in school at age 11, and I used to play kind of a garage band guitar, rhythm guitar. Kind of taught
I saw
myself
that. I saw
chords.
that
Yeah,
in your notes, and I
yeah,
thought, no, no. Do I want to ask that
yeah,
one? Nah,
yeah,
I have.
yeah.
First of all, I
So
have images. Let me just jump in for a second. I have
yeah,
my own images
uh-huh,
of cowboy, and
uh-huh,
it's not for me. My
uh-huh,
dad's family had a big cattle ranch in Montana.
uh-huh,
And I have the pictures to this day, but when I was 4 or 5, very
uh-huh,
reluctantly, I had no interest, never have had in sports or
uh-huh,
cowboyism.
uh-huh,
Fell off that damned horse,
uh-huh.
never
Yeah,
again.
that probably did it for you for the
That
ranch.
that did it for me,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
but it's interesting. What about so? What happened? Did you run into a piano or a pianist or a teacher or an aunt or an uncle? What?
No, I guess it was I must have been 11 or 12 years old, and that's when I decided I would follow music as my life study or my life direction. It's around that time, I guess you're in the seventh or eighth grade, and they start giving you all those tests,
Yes, yes.
aptitude tests. And I scored very high in mathematics and did very well in music. And so then they start counseling you. You're about to enter high school, and they say, well, what do you think you might want to do? And you're doing very, very, 99 percentile in math, and you seem to really love music. So I thought, well, I enjoyed math, but I said I would really think I would like to, go toward music. And I just love music very passionately. Obviously, piano is my primary instrument, but I love playing the cello and playing in orchestra, and I had a wide interest in music. And it was just my passion and my love for it. And it's what I often tell my students, because it's the way it hit me. It's music is a vocation, like going to the priesthood. It's something that the arts is, you should only go into them if you think you'll be miserable doing anything else. And if you have a secondary talent or interest that you think you would love equally, then do that, because the arts is so difficult. So, but for me, it was just, by that age, I just knew I wanted to be.
And it's not about being cynical about a career in
No,
the arts.
no,
It's just the hard reality, which is it's hard. Any business, any life,
of
life is
course.
hard
Yeah,
to pay the rent, buy the groceries. But
exactly.
as you said, any kind of artistic pursuit, dancing, let's say, composition, music,
Yeah,
it is a calling. I mean, there is
yeah.
something there that I know this because there's just no. Luckily, I only have about 12 more years, but the point is there was just no other choice ever.
Mhm.
From about
Yeah,
whatever, 11, 12 years old, there just wasn't, and I tried,
yeah,
and
yeah,
was bored out of my mind by
yeah,
any other
yeah.
suggestions. My dad was a dentist. He begged me. My,
Uh-huh.
my life would have been so much easier, but
Yeah.
bore me out of my mind. Sorry, Dad. Anyway, let's look at a couple of these pieces because on this program because it's so interesting. So let me kind of finish a thought of it a little bit earlier. Is there a jazz thing in your life, or is that just kind of a coincidence?
Well, uh, I love jazz.
I'm thinking of the garage band. I mean, somehow
Yeah, I
you
mean,
seem tainted.
it's I'm very open to that influence. I'm not a jazz pianist. I'm not really an improviser by nature or by training, but obviously jazz and blues. These are the great American musics, and I think it's just part of the experience of being an American as a
Yeah,
musician.
yeah. Speaking of even just a calling, there's something. I mean, there really is something about being French or being American, yeah, whatever. Just that little something where you just know somehow what
Hmm.
American music is, and of course, jazz is so important to American music. So that leads me to Leo Brouwer's piece because you mentioned in the notes that there were in this piece in particular there are specific moments where he apparently am I right on the Leo Brouwer piece? These are
Yeah,
from
yeah. In the first piece on the disc of Leo Brouwer and the third one, there are sections where he asks the performer to improvise, and he is asking the performer to improvise in the style of Egberto Gismondi, the Brazilian artist. And in the first piece, I do try to do that, and to do it, my exercise is going for walking in my neighborhood, and I would took my old Sony Walkman and just would listen and listen, listen to Gismondi's playing and over and over and over again. And then I would come back and try to come up with something that I thought was inspired by his artistry. So that's in the first one, a segment inspired by him, and that's exactly what Leo wanted. In the third piece on the disc, I kind of ventured in a different direction, and I didn't really follow Leo's or wish to follow that style. But at the time I learned the piece, it was 2016, and I was at the Bach Cantata Academy in Weimar, Germany. Helmut Rilling, the great Bach interpreter and conductor, was holding these wonderful concerts and rehearsals. And for a couple summers, I went to them. And one of the works that was being studied and presented that summer was one of the Bach Lutheran masses. And there's just a magnificent Christe Eleison in that particular mass that I just was so enchanted with. And so I was learning the Brouwer piece, and I thought, what am I going to put in for my improvisation? So I created a quotation of the Christe Eleison, and it worked beautifully. And then it spins right back into this habanera
So
theme.
was
And
that just good luck or what? I mean, because the
well,
thought was in my head, how could you throw something so completely off the wall into this piece?
it
The improv is
well,
supposed to be on what's before your eyes and fingers, yeah?
yeah, well, the thing is, it just worked. The feel of it, with certain Bach tunes, the Beatles used it. I mean, there's certain things in Bach that if you harmonize it in a certain way, it can have kind of a pop flavor. And so the habanera tune, which is in that particular Brouwer piece, it was, you know, popular in nature, and so it just weaving them together, it just worked. And
I,
I think one of the reasons it worked well is people often say, well, I didn't hear it. I missed it.
I did. I told you that. I confessed right away.
But
What? I didn't hear that.
yeah, I sometimes even talk about it before I play it, and people say, well, where was it? But it's there. Clearly, there's two quotations, but it works. It so works with the rest of the feel of the piece, which is supposed to happen, that it's kind of seamless, and I think makes it a successful insertion and goes with the spirit of it.
Brava.
It's in there.
Brava.
Thank you.
You pulled that one off. And
Thank
we're
you.
talking about Leo Brouwer's, there are 3 of these bocetos from 10 bocetas,
Yes.
sorry, 10 little sketches. And by the way, I had never heard these pieces. They're so yummy. And they're based on artwork.
Yeah, they're inspired by different Cuban artists that he was, a great admirer of, and he wrote 10 of these.
And also, see if I remember the program booklet correctly, you visited him in 2016 in Cuba.
Yes, in Havana. There were a group of musicians from Lynn University, and including the president of our university and the dean of our conservatory and some of the faculty. We presented concerts and master classes in Havana, and it was my first time to visit the country. And Leo Brouwer was presenting us in some of these events, so I had a chance to meet him, to get to know him. And this is where he handed me a copy of the Diez Bocetos, because he's primarily known as a classical guitar composer. He's a great classical guitarist. He's also written a lot of film music, including the very famous Like Water for Chocolate, and some string quartets. He's a prolific composer, but the piano pieces that he showed me were the Diez Bocetos, and I like them very much, and so I chose 3 to present on this disc.
Yeah, and they're very, very interesting, very well composed. They grip the mind, they grip the imagination. They're tremendous narrative. I'm thinking of the Bocetos number 7, Cabrera Moreno. I still can't quite figure out what the narrative is, but it's there. I mean, there's clearly a narrow. It's a kind of a mystical time capsule of a piece. That's what I've written in my notes. Whatever that means. Magical, magical, magical. And somehow that's very Cuban. I'm thinking of in Latin literature, I've forgotten what I mean, but you know what I mean, something visionary novelist.
The magic realism.
Thank you.
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Marquez. And so this magical realism that is really Latin in its literature, its film, and so on. That's kind of the impression I had from these.
Well, one of the interesting things about Marquez is, he was in Cuba, and I was talking to Leo about Latin South American literature, and I told him my favorite writer is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and he says, I know him. I knew him. He said, when Marquez won the Nobel Prize, I think it was in 1980, he said Fidel Castro had a very small but elite party, and Leo was invited, but he had a wonderful party for Marquez when he won the Nobel Prize. And he said he did know it. I was just floored by that. I was so impressed because I'm such a fan of Marquez. I've read all of his books, and I think he's just such an extraordinary writer. So that was a special treat to meet someone who actually, knew him fairly well.
Yeah, and also to meet Brouwer himself.
Yes,
what
absolutely.
an amazing, really master composer he
Absolutely.
was. Ellen Swilich, very well known in America. This beautiful, beautiful lament from 1999 for piano. Tell me about this. You had an opportunity to meet Ellen at some point?
Yes. Well, every year we have a new music festival at Lynn University, and in 2016. Ellen was the guest composer in residence. It's like a week-long festival, and the composer comes in, works with our composition students. We play usually a whole evening of the composer's works. And so I learned the lament for the concert that presented her music, and so I had an opportunity to play it for her and talk with her about what inspired her to write it. And it's a beautiful thing. It's often also played on cello. I think the original version is this piano solo that I played, but there's a wonderful arrangement for cello. It works very well with cello and
cello alone, or cello and piano?
Cello and piano.
Cello and piano. It would be lovely anyway, cello being that.
Yeah, and it reminds you of, the Fauré elegy, that kind of cello.
And then this is very interesting. I went in. I wasn't quite clear. I'm looking at Phillip Evans now. the pieces that you have of Phillip Evans. And
Yeah.
I wasn't quite clear. I kind of read the note. I sort of looked at how you had organized it on the
Hmm.
CD, and then it made sense. The first of, I think, what is it, three pieces of his? Two.
Yeah, well, there's one piece, a minuetto, that he wrote when he was 11 years
11
old,
years old. It's incredible.
and it's a lovely thing. And then the other two are from a suite that
There we
he
go.
written in 1945, from a three-movement suite. So it's three pieces, but
But
from
talk
two.
about precocious, just
Yes.
as a composer, but also as a thinking mind, because the
Hmm.
Suite 1945
Hmm.
has that. In other words, the
Hmm.
war. There is those two pieces, the saraband and the aria are. There's a you know you he's 17 years old, but he's seen and read and heard. He knows
Yeah,
of this
it was very
catastrophe.
influenced by those times.
And the
Absolutely.
minuetto is just plain original. I can't think of
Yeah.
for an 11-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very mature. So that's a little that little grouping of pieces is really quite a gem, and it does take you, as you described. This CD covers such a huge span of years. You can take it back to 1939 to this little 11-year-old's work. It's
Hmm.
not a little piece. It's 5 6 minutes, as I recall,
Yes.
and is
Yeah.
fairly complex, and develops in a fairly sophisticated manner, and so on. It's not child stuff at all. Okay, Almeida Prado. Now this set it's so fascinating, and there's so much here just that stand alone for pianists to play. And I wonder if these pieces are played very much. But it's from Halley about the comet,
Hmm.
1986. I remembered well looking up
Yes.
in the sky and seeing
Yeah.
that comet in 1986. It's a three-movement work. From Cartas Celestes. I love that. I just try so hard on my Spanish. Now I'm in trouble, but the first
Mhm.
piece, Infinita Viagem, I think. Anyway,
Viagem, Infinita
Via,
Viagem.
thank you.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to stop. I'm mortified. An Infinite Voyage, April 1986 is the other piece. In the Southern Hemisphere. Now I didn't quite get what was going on there.
Well,
Would you please explain?
That's when Halley was visible in the southern hemisphere.
So
And
what I was looking at in 1986, I thought we were in the Northern Hemisphere. See what I mean?
well, but in the, it
I
this
guess it was visible there as well, of course.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's when it was
And of
yeah.
course he was Brazilian,
Yeah.
so that okay. Oh, I
Yeah.
stand relieved. I thought, what
Yeah, I mean
April,
that's I
Southern Hemisphere? What's that about? Anyway, but of course, yeah.
from this from the perspective of the southern hemisphere, I think was what he was trying
So
to.
what these three that is a I guess it's kind of a suite or a
Yeah,
sonata.
Halley is a suite. It's a
Yeah,
three movement suite, and then the last movement, the Pax Celestis, it's the celestial piece and
and
a
very
very
very nice.
piece. Yeah.
It also describes on the piano yet already the infinite that Pax Alistic
Hmm.
describes the vastness. I mean, I love the way the piece
Yeah.
disappears into just a vast void.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
How'd that one go? Where'd you meet Almeida Prado?
I met him on my first tour of Latin America, which was in 1986. I had won a competition called the Artistic Ambassador Program, and that was a wonderful program to send American pianists abroad. And we would play concerts in various countries, and it was part of the United States Information Agency programs. And so one of the concerts was in Campinas, Brazil, at a place called Unicamp, which is the university there. And Almeida Prado was on faculty, and he came to my concert, and he was very complimentary. And he shared with me this new piece that he had written, this Halley. He was finishing it up, and so I took a look at it, and I liked it very much. And when I got back home, I contacted him, and I was about to play a Merkin Concert Hall recital in New York in September of '86, and I asked him. I said, "Could I have the premiere of this work? I will play it in New York and give the world premiere." And he said, "Absolutely." So I learned it, and I put it on that concert, and that was its premiere.
What is
Uh,
it about you? Do you have a dream circle somewhere? Hang, I don't know. There's something about you that is like people are handing off music to you every time you meet them. It's hello, how are you? Have you seen my, hello, how are you? I've got three movements here. Oh, Merkin, here, take all of it, play.
Well, some of it comes from an early interest in new music, and when I played my debut in 1982 at Weill Recital Hall, at Carnegie Hall, I commissioned two composers, Ellie Siegmeister and David Noon, to write etudes for me for my debut, because the second half of the program was a Chopin etude and a Rachmaninoff Debussy etude, and I closed with Liszt Mazeppa. And then I wanted to put two sets of contemporary etudes. And so these pieces were written in 1982. They would just the ink was barely dry and a few months before, and I learned them, and I inserted them so that it made the second half of the program actually quite interesting. It wasn't just the standard etudes, but some fresh new ones. And so and my first CD that I did with a label in California called Proton Records included these American premieres and also some music of Robert Starr along with the Prokofiev Sonata. So early on, I had an interest in branching out beyond kind of the standard repertoire, and it's just been kind of a lifelong pursuit and activity, and that's kind of the feeling of compilation of this CD, or these different experiences I've had throughout my career. And so I kind of tried to
as you just exposed a moment ago, it was, forgive me, I forgot the composers already, but American composer, and Prokofiev, just almost like an afterthought. And then Prokofiev Sonata, yeah. So I mean, in other words, Prokofiev outnumbered on a piano program. Okay, I see what you mean. John Sharpley, these it's from Four Preludes from 1998. And by the way, that is very interesting, because here is my impression. The CD begins very pleasantly, very charming, very interesting. A little improvisation, a little jazzy, some jazz licks, and then it starts to get more and more complex. This CD, the music, and at least that's what I'm hearing. And so the last piece is probably the most interesting and complex and complicated, I think. I don't know, you tell me, because you're the pianist, but John Sharpley's 3 of his 4 preludes. Are they, where do they rank? Pretty tough in terms
Oh yeah, they're quite challenging. Well, John is a wonderful pianist.
They're also fun.
They're well written for the piano, and he has very imaginative use of the sostenuto pedal. And John has lived in Singapore for well over 3 decades, and so in the pieces there's also Eastern influence and also some wonderful kind of sarcastic use of quotation device, the Yankee Doodle and the Doodle.
Doodle is a standalone wonderful piece that should be performed a lot as a little encore piece. It's
very
hoot and a half is what it is. Is a hoot and a half, but it's also very sophisticated, very interesting. And then in comes that Yankee Doodle tune. You can't miss it. But I found Reflection, the first prelude. It's just very simple.
Yeah, and it's a very meditative. That clearly is an Eastern influence, and I actually just saw him recently. I was in Singapore and Philippines for concerts earlier this month, and I had a chance to see John again.
Yeah, and you knew him before in college or something.
Yeah, well, no, we know each other from high school. We had the same high school piano teacher, and that's where we first met. And then we went off our various ways after we left Houston, and he went off to Boston for studies, and then eventually ended up in Singapore, and I went my direction. And then when I started touring a lot in Asia, I located him, and when I was in Singapore for the first time, I got in touch with him, and we hadn't seen each other in years, and so we started up our friendship again, and then he started sharing a lot of scores with me. I have a big stack of Sharpley scores.
I told you, there's something, I don't know.
And he's a very prolific composer, a lot of wonderful stuff that he's written. He's working on now, I think, another opera there, but he's a lot of wonderful piano music, and so we just kind of reconnected, and I just played all 4 of the preludes in my concert in Singapore at the Yong Soo To Conservatory. I was there earlier in the month, and he was at the concert, and always makes you a little nervous when the composer's in the the and I played that pieces a lot, but
Did he
liked them.
Did he hand off any new music to you?
Actually, yes. I have 3 or more scores. Yes. Yes.
But I love the memory of Eleanor Reichardt, a dear friend, a wonderful little piece, and then at the very end, bringing in the sheaves. Yes, just so touching.
That's really, really, really great.
Well, I think we've just about touched on everything. You mentioned something. I hope I can find it, because I heard it. This business, the subtle use of pedal
Uh-huh.
for echo, and I can't quite remember the piece, but right in the very beginning of the piece, it's such a wonderful effect, and it's obvious how it's achieved, but it's
Yeah.
such a great idea. Do I
Yeah.
make any
Yeah.
sense? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think you're probably talking about the doodle. There's the sostenuto pedal used there, but it's a moment where you compress or press down several keys silently. Then you put down the sostenuto pedal, and then you leave that down for the whole piece. In doodle,
Oh,
the sostenuto pedal is left for the whole piece with those silent 5 tones in the middle of the keyboard, which you
yeah.
put down. Then you put down the sostenuto pedal, so those strings then are open for the whole piece. So then you start doodling around and all these wonderful different ideas, but kind of accumulating through the whole piece are all those overtones and all those wonderful sounds. And so it's just,
This is why I
masterful.
always wonder about composers, just the
Hmm.
magic of how they can conceive of how to bring those sounds out
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the ether. It's amazing.
yeah.
Where are we? We're at 30 minutes. I think we're about done. Let me ask you this question. I think we kind of touched on everything. Tell me what I forgot to ask you about, or that you're done. Let's no, you get where? What have I forgotten to talk about? Come on, I must have forgotten something. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I want to talk briefly about Tom McKinley's pieces.
Okay, good. There we go. I did forget
Yeah.
Tom McKinley's
And
piece. Let me pull
those
down to it.
pieces were written for me, and Tom has been a great colleague of mine for years at the at Herod Conservatory, but also at
Very
the
good.
Conservatory at Lynn University. He's our theory professor and composition professor, and just a terrific colleague and professor and musician. And Michael Anderson, we haven't talked too much about, but Michael was actually our first composition major at Lynn University. And he was both a student of Phillip Evans and of Thomas McKinley. And he was a piano student of mine. And he came to audition for me to study privately when he was about 10 or 11 years old. And he played some pieces nicely, but then he said he liked to improvise. I said, "Do you?" I said, "Let me hear what you've got." So he played this lovely little piece in C major, and it had so much feeling in it. Based on that, I said, "I'll take you. I'll take you on as a student." And so it was great to work with him. He became a very fine pianist, but a very gifted composer. And then he enrolled at Lynn University, and he started out the first 2 years as a piano major, and then our dean decided it was time to start a composition program, and he was our first composition student in it and first major. So there's kind of a tie-in there with
Yeah.
him, with Tom, and with Phillip Evans.
And then did I misunderstand? Is he also teaching? He's not teaching.
But no,
No.
Michael now lives in Winston-Salem, South Carolina. He has a job as a composer in residence at the Redeemer Presbyterian Church in
I
Winston.
remember reading that now, yeah.
Yeah.
And let's look at Thomas McKinley. And thank you for catching these two that I've forgot
Mm-hmm.
about. Fantasy Pieces for Piano from 2005. Invocation. It's an interesting, twisted little tune drift. It's one of the
Mm-hmm.
notes I have. I hope any of that makes sense to you. It's
Mm-hmm.
and it's a kind of a lengthy little invocation, and then the tiger,
Mm-hmm.
thy fearful symmetry, the
Yeah, yeah,
William Blake poem. I read the poem,
yeah.
and that's a very that McKinley piece of composition is pretty intense, pretty
Yeah.
dissonant and expressionistic. And how what's the preparation like? What's the piano writing like? How does
Well,
this
the
piece
word
work?
expressionistic, I think, is most apt there, particularly in that invocation. And Tom is a really great lover of the expressionistic, of expressionism and the expressionistic composers, Alban Berg, etc. And I think you feel that very much in that piece, and I love that repertoire as well. So it's very kind of heart wrenching in that type of raw expressionistic style. And then the second one is I've actually recommended that he think about transcribing it maybe for a woodwind quintet or a quartet of some type, because it's completely symmetrical. You have 4 voices, and
Hmm.
2 are way on the outside, and they're in symmetry, and then the 2 voices right in the middle. It's really extremely difficult to play because of the way it's written. It's a slow moving piece, but the coordination of it is extremely hard on the piano. But when I look at it, I'm thinking this would really be very interesting to hear a string quartet play it, where you could really have the 4 different voices with 4 different colored instruments. So I've suggested to him to think about, maybe making a version of it for wood quintet or quartet or string quartet.
Hey,
But what,
thanks for making such clarity for all of us about how you can look at something and kind of make a determination that it might be more suitable in a different form. And is he
mhm.
speaking to you at all?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well,
Okay,
his office
okay,
is
okay.
right next to mine, so we're still on very good terms. But but it works for the piano. But I just hear in my imagination
Mhm.
something, that could be
Yeah,
another way of looking at it.
yeah, and voicing
Yeah,
can
yeah,
reveal
yeah,
something
yeah.
else, if you will.
Exactly.
Um, Composers, we're going to wind it down here. I'm having a wonderful chat with pianist Roberta Rust. Your 2019 Navona CD. It's all going to go up on performingartsreview.net. And as I've said, I do not receive an extra bonus gift from Navona, but they do the greatest job of setting up the whole page of the bio, the interview. I read the blog interview that they did with you. It's just marvelous, and the packaging and everything. So I really want to once again congratulate Navona. They do such a great job. The CD is called Direct Contact. Now we know why. Composers
Hmm.
Rockberg, Anderson, Brouwer, Zwilich, Evans, Prado, McKinley, Sharpley. Come on, that's a unique CD just all by itself, doing primarily American composers, a Brazilian, a Mexican, just to kind of stir up the divergent pot. What else can I say about it before we wind it down? What's
I
coming
think
up next, by the way?
that
Anything
that
on the
I
list?
don't know. That I haven't thought that far ahead. I want to enjoy
Yeah, this is
this project,
2019, I
and
mean,
let it sink in, and then I'll see
yeah,
where that takes me.
good idea. Uh, Roberta, thank you so much for giving me some time in the early evening, I think, over in Florida
Yeah.
at 9 o'clock or so. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks a lot. Great fun.
Thank you very much for having me
Good,
on.
good
Thank
talk. See you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye bye.